Alrighty. We're going to go ahead and finish out this paragraph today, which is going to be Hebrews chapter 9, verses 13 and 14. I hope that we can finish this rather quickly, or at least get through these two verses here. I know I'm already running a little late, so I want to just jump right into this directly. We're here in this paragraph. This is 11 through 14. This is after 10 verses of the description of all the items, the artifacts, the rituals, etc., all these things that God instituted to be, as is described in verse 1, regulatory worship, right? Now, I'm not talking about the actual Sunday morning worship. I'm talking about the ministry that is supposed to be before the Lord that the Levites interact with. And what's described here in verse 11 and down is kind of the antithesis of that. It's the opposite of that, because there is this strong adversative, but when Christ appeared, something changed when he appeared, and he's the high priest of the good things that have come. Then to the greater and more perfect tent, this is where he goes. He does not go into a temple or a tabernacle. He goes into a holy place. He has no need for man-made tabernacles of holiness. He entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, which is fascinating. Consider that there is some kind of means that takes place at the point at which you have access to God. You can't just go in there. You have to have means of going in there. Something or some key or some object or some item has to give you access. And in this case, it's his own blood, thus securing eternal redemption. Then we look here at these last two verses. Because, why? If the blood of bulls and goats and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer, there's an interesting one there, sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without the blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God? So, this is our section today, starting here down to here. You'll note that it's kind of two. We're going to train. I'm hoping to do both of these tonight because they are both kind of supposed to be used in tandem. And that's described by the fact that in this case, you're dealing with what logicians and rhetorical people and debaters call the Fattori. Excuse me, I'm going to get this right. Fattori. There we go. Argument. Fortori. This is Latin for and the greater and the larger. And what this is, in other words, this author is using a logical argument and saying, because we know this, then even better is this. Because we know this is a fact, we can absolutely establish this as fact. Because we know this does 100%, how much more will this even accomplish 200%? And this is something that's even to this day you can see in use in law and debate and argumentation and legal matters, that they will say, because I know X, if Y is even greater, then it's established even more so on the premise of X. So the author is using an a fortiori argument. Because we know this is true, we know this is even more true. Okay? So first I want to look at the statement that is true, and then we'll determine the statement that is even greater or more so true. And the statement that begins is, again, based in Old Testament ritual. So let's look at that and translate that right here. And that's pretty straightforward. According to our English translations, you see the gar right here, G-A-R. That is for, I'm going to put it in the front of our English translation, for if, right? This is for if tahema, the blood. Remember, hematologist or hematology or is the study of blood, and this is hema, blood. For if the blood, I'm trying to make this fit, give me just a minute. And then you have your two nouns. You can see the O-N on the end here. Tragon, kai, tauron. What do you think that is? We got goats and bulls. Kai, spados. And you got something else. Spados is ash. Sometimes it can mean dirt, but typically in this case we know it's ash, and we'll see that contextually here in just a second. because it's the ash of what? The Malleus. This is a female calf. This is a heifer. This is a female cow that's specifically described of a younger age. And then you have Rontisusa. Rontisusa. So this is it actually can be used to rain, but from human terms we use sprinkle. So it can mean rain, but it can also mean a sprinkling of some sort. So it depends on who's doing it. If it's coming out of your hand, it's a sprinkle. If it's coming out of heaven, it's rain. Tus the. Here we go. We got some big verbs here. Kekoino minus. The profane ones, or those who are profane. This is a big participle here. We'll say the profane ones. We'll just kind of simplify this for a minute. Remember, a participle in English is kind of a noun / adjective combined. It's when you say like the profane, those who are profane, or those who are running, those who are swimming. That would be like a participle usage, right? You're using a verb to describe a noun. Something or someone is profane or common. Then you have agiaze. This is agia. Agia is holy, right? This is the verb form, to make holy, or to set apart. To make holy, prostain to the tes sarkos, the flesh. Sarkos is the flesh. Kathar rotata, to be purified. Or actually, I'm sorry, this is a noun. So this would be the flesh, purification, or the description of some kind of noun form of to purify, purification. So, if the blood of goats and bulls and the ash of heifers sprinkled on the profane ones to make holy or purify the flesh, to make holy the flesh for purification, something along those lines. So, what are we talking about here? Well, this is the original premise, right? This is a part of our offertory argument that describes the beginning of the original premise. And so this is established as true, and that will establish verse 14 is even more true. So what do we have here? The statement is the blood of goats and bulls purifies the flesh. You say, wait a minute, that seems like the opposite of what he's been teaching for the past really several verses, right? Is that it can't purify anybody. That's correct. That's why there's this modifier here. It's fleshly purification, which is an oxymoronic statement in and of itself, but we'll get into that here in just a minute. But you have 3 items listed here. There's the blood of goats, the blood of bulls, and the ashes of heifers. 3 items create this flesh purification symbolism of some sort. You have to sprinkle it. You have to either the blood or the ashes or whatever on the profane ones to make holy the flesh for purification. You say, now wait a minute. Here's another logical problem. Was the blood sprinkled on the people? No. There was never a point in time where the blood of goats and bulls was sprinkled on the people. I'm talking about the blood was never put on the sinners. It was put on the altar. Absolutely. It was put on the incense altar. It was all over the bronze altar. It was on the mercy seat under the Ark of the Covenant, but it was never sprinkled back on the people themselves. So how then can he say you sprinkle this stuff on profane or unholy people to make their flesh holy? Well, we're talking about a very specific ritual that happens here. The ashes of the heifer are absolutely sprinkled on the profane ones, and we're going to look at that here in just a minute. Before I do that, just a real quick note. This word is you've seen this already in verse 12, the blood of goats and bulls. You'll note that I did translate this bulls instead of calves. I believe it's the previous translation. It's like a bullock or a calf, a young male cow. This word is different right here for cow. This is the same word. Goat is the same. A male goat, typically a younger male goat, but this word does change here. This instead of a word for a young bull, this is just a word for a bull. It doesn't necessarily entail young in it. Does that mean any significant alteration or change or interpretation? No, not really. It basically boils down to about the same. There's no major change in interpretation. He just chose a different word to illustrate kind of more generically, this is what bulls do, right? They make the flesh pure in some way. And you say, how does that work? How is it that the blood of the bulls purify And even if they do not, and we know they don't, right? They can't perfect the conscience. They can't give you access to God. How's it they're purifying the flesh? Well, the key to that is the one that's added here, the ashes of the heifer. Okay? This is a very specific reference to one thing that you'll find only in Numbers 19. Numbers 19. So in Numbers 19 is a very unusual command. Actually, you know what? I am not sure it's Numbers 19. It might be Leviticus 19. Somebody might have to check me on that. It's either Numbers or Leviticus 19. That doesn't look right to me. I'm pretty sure that says supposed to say Leviticus, but I could be wrong. I don't have it in front of me. So either Leviticus or Numbers 19 describes a very unusual ritual. And this is in the law. This is the Levitical law. Even if it's not written in Leviticus, this is priestly law, because you'll see an unusual description here of a red heifer and what this red heifer is supposed to accomplish. And it's set in the midst of these commands, and it says, here's a statute of the law the Lord has commanded. Tell the people to bring you a red heifer without defect, in which there's no blemish, on which their yoke has never come. So you got a young red cow. You shall give it to the priest, and he shall take it outside, and he'll slaughter it. And the priest will take some of its blood with its finger and sprinkle some of the blood towards the front of the tent, meeting 7 times. The heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its skin, flesh, blood, even its dung shall be burned. Okay, so you kill this heifer outside the camp. He sprinkles some of the blood towards the front of the tabernacle, and then you burn everything, all of it. The entire calf is burned, all the way down to ash. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn and throw them into the fire, burning with the fire burning the heifer. Okay, so you're creating an ash pile of this heifer burned all the way down to ash, and you've also got some ash of hyssop and cedar wood. And then the priest shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come in the camp. But the priest shall be unclean till evening. The one who burns the heifer shall wash his clothes, and he's also unclean. The man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place. They shall be kept for the water for impurity. This is key, if I can write. Water for impurity for the congregation of the people of Israel. It is a sin offering. And the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean till evening. This is that shall be a perpetual statute for the people of Israel and for the stranger who sojourns among them. Whoever touches the dead body of any person shall be unclean 7 days. He shall cleanse himself with the water on the 3rd day. In essence, what you have here is a recipe for holy water. You have almost seems mystical, almost seems like witchcraft, almost seems like potion brewing. This idea of you burn a heifer, you throw in some hyssop and cedar wood, and when it's ash, you take that ash and you mix it with water, and that's the holy water for cleaning impurities. And he's got to cleanse himself. If you touch a dead body, you got to clean yourself with that water on the 3rd and 7th day. If he does not clean himself on the 3rd and 7th day, he will not ever become clean. Whoever touches a dead person and does not cleanse himself, because the water for impurity was not thrown on him, he shall be unclean. His uncleanness shall still be on him. Now, I just included a few verses here, but the chapter goes on and discusses the uses of this holy water, this unusual mixture that's created here for the purpose of cleaning you or cleansing you if you touch dead matter, specifically of a body, of a human person. If you touch any human corpse, you have to be cleansed with this water. And this is fascinating because it does kind of give you the indication that he has to cleanse himself. Now, it's not explicitly stated in the text, but it does seem to imply totally. Right? In other words, this is not sprinkled on you. This is not just a little dabbling of some holy water on you to fix, some kind of ceremonial cleanses. This is like purification level. This is like get in the bathtub. This is cleanse yourself, whatever that means. It's left very generic. Doesn't really tell us one way or the other whether we're talking about dipping your hands in a little bit and washing your hands or you get in the tub. But definitely the implication is you must be pure when you get out. So, this law confounds so many people. And I'm not certainly going to solve all the problems today, but you can read article after article on this. I read several. This law makes 0 sense for a number of reasons. This whole law here has no morality attached to it whatsoever, right? In other words, there's no moral, spiritual problem being created by touching a dead body that you have to atone for. However, ironically, it is stated as a sin offering. Okay? So even if we don't think there's some kind of morality attached to it, the Lord is telling you, you use this water to cleanse sins. It is an offering to sins in some way, and touching a dead body is a sin in the Mosaic covenant, even if we would not believe in outside Mosaic covenant thinking that it is a sin to touch a dead body today. But be it as it may, why would this law exist? And the next answer that's typically used at this point is they say, well, it's hygienic. If you I can't remember the name. I think it was Louis Pasteur discovered microscopic organisms that in the 1800s, and I cannot remember his name, but the doctor who began the practice of washing your hands after touching dead matter in medical facilities jumped his hospitals forward leaps and bounds when he realized that when you touch dead matter and you move your hands and you touch something else, you're easily spreading disease. And so some people say, well, it's hygienic. If you touch a dead, this law was meant to keep the people of Israel safe by touching this kind of stuff, or you touch dead matter and then you got to clean yourself with some water. That makes sense up until you realize this water has ash in it of all kinds of carbonized material in here. Now, sure, it was burned and it was purified in the fire microscopically, but if you let water sit with ash in it for a long time, for any period of time, how long do you think it's going to take for that water to become contaminated? You certainly wouldn't drink that water. You definitely wouldn't consider that water sterile by any stretch of the imagination. So to clean yourself with some ash water is not hygienic in any way. This law was not designed to keep you safe for hygiene purposes. So what do you do with this then? Why was this law even created? Why institute such a law? What does this accomplish? Does it really cleanse your body or keep you safe from the dead matter, really? Or if it does, it's pretty low level because you're just putting more muddy water back on you to clean it off. Nor is it moral, strictly speaking. So what are we going to do with this law? And this is the only mention of ashes of heifers ever in the Levitical law or anywhere else in the Old Testament. So this must be what the author is referring to. It has to be this law. And this certainly is a law that somehow involves purification of unclean people, exactly like we see right here. You sprinkle it on profane people to make their flesh purified. How can we even make sense of this? And this is still heavily debated and discussed among a great deal of scholarship as to why this law would exist and purify anybody. And the bottom line that you ultimately have to go with, and you can argue this in circles for hours and hours, but no matter what the case may be, if God institutes a law designed to purify the flesh that is a useless law, both physically and morally, what reason would God have for instituting it? And the argument I'm going to present is that God does not have to give you any reason whatsoever. In other words, God can create a seemingly useless law that in no way is hygienic or moral, and he can create it for no other reason than to place a burden upon people so they will understand their need for Christ. That's it. He can create a difficult law to keep, and he is fully within his rights and is fully just and justified doing so to create difficult laws for the purpose of being difficult. He can set upon you any yoke and or burden he desires and command you to do it. And at the moment in time that he commands you to do it, it is morally obligatory that you do so, right? You are wrong if you disobey. Even if he, hypothetically, if God were to command you to go out and paint a fence, right? Even if you don't believe painting a fence is in any way moral, disobeying God is. If God commands you to do X and Y and Z and you do not do it, then it becomes a moral issue. So why create this law? Because the law, the Mosaic law, for no other reason, was designed to be burdensome. And I will also add this onto the pile, is that he can create typologies for no other reason than just to create typologies. He can create a law that does nothing except point to Christ, and that's it. That's the only purpose that law has. It doesn't make anybody healthier, it doesn't make anybody holier. It just simply reminds you that Christ is coming one day. That's it. That's the entire purpose of keeping that law. He can create a system where people are unclean if they touch death, and you have to have a heifer has to die sacrificially to make you clean when you touch something dead. And there's obviously several clear typological implications of such a law, right? Even if we're applying a great deal of symbolism, we know Christ had to die to save you from death. Christ had to die so you would not experience the corruption of death. You have to be quite literally cleansed in his blood, right? His blood he must be destroyed, sacrificed, and that blood must be cleaning you, right? That blood cleanses you. If not physically, it cleanses you spiritually, cleanses you morally. His blood, quite literally, is the reason that you are able to be clean at all before the presence of God. And so this is kind of a type of Christ, right? The heifer is the type of Christ. And that could be it. That could be the only reason. That's the only reason why. At least that's what I'm going to argue, that this law exists. It has no other purpose whatsoever except to be a type for Christ to come. And it was placed upon people to be burdensome so that they would remember they need Christ. That's it. So, because we can see here in this law, the idea is your flesh will be clean. If you touch a dead body and you sprinkle some of the special water on you, your flesh will be clean. You'll be able to be permitted to go back into the assembly. This is something that was made clear to me recently, and I should have put the quote up here, and I forgot to. Nowhere in the Mosaic Law, anywhere, is there any promise of eternal reward, ever. If you study the law inside and out, you will nowhere see where God promises salvation or entrance into the kingdom of heaven or into his presence if you keep all these laws. Nowhere. Now, he does promise physical blessings. He promises he will take care of you on the land, that you will have a long and prosperous life, you'll be well-to-do, you'll have generations of peace, you'll be at peace with your enemies, blah, blah, blah. He gives you many physical blessings, but nowhere is there a spiritual or eternal blessing even attached to, even if you could keep all these laws. Nowhere. Even hypothetically speaking, if you were capable of keeping the law of Moses, nowhere does God promise salvation from it at all, even if you do all those things. So here you have an example of cleanliness and uncleanliness, and I know this is a major theme that you've seen all across the law. They don't call it, the word is nowhere used for sin, it's used for clean and unclean, and that is used on purpose. From the very beginning, from Moses' institution of the laws, it didn't say you are unclean in certain cases, or there are certain sins that you commit, but there are in many cases where even if it's completely aside from sin, you're just simply unclean. And that can have nothing to do whatsoever with you. That can have nothing to do with any moral action that you took. You could be completely and totally righteous, hypothetically, before the Mosaic Law and still be unclean if you touch a dead body, right? Even if you had to for some specific reason, or even if you were obligated to do so for a particular reward. Cleanliness and sinfulness are not equated the same in the Mosaic Law. But no matter what, you've got to fix it. So I want to be clear. What I'm arguing for is that this purification of the flesh described in verse 3 is not sin mitigating. Cleanliness is a different issue entirely from sinfulness. You can do things that are both sinful and unclean. You certainly can accomplish acts that are in the Venn diagram, both of them. You can be sinful and unclean. You can do things that are both sinful and unclean simultaneously, but it is also fully possible for you to be sinless, hypothetically, and still be unclean for doing certain random actions. We'll just call them random actions for a minute, even if we know they're not random. So what I'm arguing here is this is not, from when we're talking about you purify your flesh, we're not dealing with sin. We're dealing with cleanliness. And cleanliness by Jewish understanding and Mosaic law implications can be completely aside. It can be hygienic. There are certainly laws that seem to be instituted for no other purpose than to keep you clean, literally, hygienic in nature, to preserve the well-being and the life of a Jewish people before medicine existed and they knew what was happening when They were lived among a great deal of pagans who were certainly not hygienic in the least. That certainly can be an implication, but then there are some laws that are just randomly make you unclean that seem to be for no reason whatsoever. And this is one of them right here. And I'm here to argue that cleanliness has nothing to do with sinfulness. It has to do with a representation of Christ later, right? And we know the implications of this. Cleanliness, uncleanliness doesn't, sin aside, even if you're perfectly righteous and you're very just and a righteous person, hypothetically under the law, if you're unclean, if you touched a dead body, even though you haven't sinned today, hypothetically, you can't go into the assembly, right? You're not allowed to enter into the temple. You're certainly not allowed to offer, you have to make this correct atonement to be clean before you're allowed to enter into the tabernacle or go through the process, whatever the process is. In this case, cleaning yourself with this water, then you're allowed to enter into the larger tent of the tabernacle. But you definitely cannot be unclean for a long time and not survive the assembly, right? If you defile the tabernacle of the Lord, what happens? You get cut off, right, from Israel. Uncleanliness for a prolonged period of time, if not addressed, leads to getting cut out. And you could do this completely aside from sin. You could be a good man, and this happened to you. So this is the purification of the flesh. This is external, outward actions designed, if not hygienically, completely aside from moral rights and wrongs, but to remind you of the typology of Christ, and a lack of interest in keeping them and maintaining them leads to getting cut off. This has nothing to do with salvation. This has nothing to do with condemnation. And that's why we see this word. Now, this is an interesting word here. Profane, right? The profane one, to make holy the flesh. So you sprinkle this water, apparently, according to the writer of Hebrews, on the people that are profane. And this word right here is a little bit unusual because it is from the word koinonio. Koinonia actually would be the noun form of it. If you've ever heard the word koinonia in Greek, it means commonality or fellowship. You share something in common with all these people. Koinonia is like the fellowship, the gathering. You're in common with all these people. So profane is the verb form. Koinonio is to make something common, to make something regular. It's mundane. It's normal. Doesn't necessarily imply sin per se. Now, in most cases it's used. It does seem to imply sin, but in most cases it can be used either positively or negatively. There are some cases where it is used positively. Koinonia, for example, is wherever you see the word fellowship, and usually in Paul's epistles it's the word koinonia. This is all made common. This is all made together. They all fellowship and all have unity. That's koinonia. But it also can be used negatively. It is used negatively in this case, most definitely, because we're talking about uncleanliness, and it's kind of the opposite of what is holy, right? Because holiness in Greek, hagios, literally reads to set something apart, right? To put it aside, to set it apart from everything else. It's sacred because it's different. It's sacred because it's not common. It's sacred because it is the opposite of commonality. That's what holiness is. This is the opposite of that word. Here's some uses of it where you can see it is used negatively, right? Christ uses it when he says what comes out of your mouth defiles a person, right? Definitely he's talking about sin here, things that come out of your mouth that do genuinely spiritually defile you with sin, right? Definitely a sin word here. You can also find in Acts 10. This is where Peter, this is the vision of Peter, right, where the sheet comes down and he sees all these animals and he's hungry, and the Lord tells him kill and eat, and he says what God has made clean, or he says I'm not going to eat it if it makes me unclean, and then the Lord says don't call it common. Okay, this could go either way. This isn't really neither positive or negative. The Lord is saying do not call it unclean. You cannot call it unclean, even if we believe that eating something unclean isn't sinful. He's saying doesn't matter. You can't. I made it clean, right? So the issue is not whether or not it is moral or not to eat it. The issue is he's saying it's clean. I made it clean. That's the end of the argument. So it can be used in a number of different ways. My point mostly at this time is just to indicate the fact that it is mostly, shall we say, a sinless word. It really doesn't necessarily, you can be profane, you can be unclean, and not necessarily be in violation of a sinful law according to Mosaic standards. And that seems to be the context we're in right here in Hebrews chapter 9, right? Is how the law works. And we know that because it makes holy towards the flesh. So the other reason I will argue for this is not a sin word is because apparently what the sprinkling on the profane does is it makes holy towards the flesh. And you probably know immediately that that's a paradox. There is no holy flesh. Flesh is not at least sinful flesh. Let's put it this way. All the flesh on this planet right now, maybe one day it'll be glorified, but at this moment in time, it is certainly not holy. Right? There is no sense in which the flesh is ever described positively as being pure or holy anywhere in the Greek New Testament or in any testament whatsoever. There's only a few uses of it that you could even maybe argue that are positive in the Greek New Testament, but by far the theology of the flesh over and over again across the New Testament is it is not a good thing. It is something you put to death. Right? It is to make it holy is to purify it, is to destroy it, right? And replace it with glorified flesh, effectively. Right? I mean, Romans 8:3 through 8 is that famous chapter where it says, those who live according to the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh. For the set the mind on the flesh is death. Right? If you focus on the flesh, you'll die. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. They have no ability or possibility of pleasing God if you are in the flesh. The flesh has no capacity to please God. So how on earth are you going to make it holy? Right? Galatians 3:1-3 is kind of a more interesting take on it. Remember, this is kind of the apex of the letter, Galatians. Paul is very, shall we say, disparaging of the Galatians in general, has nothing good to say about them, and it kind of crescendos in chapter 3. He says, "O foolish Galatians, having begun by the Spirit, are you perfected by the flesh?" That's almost exactly like our wording here in 9:13, purified by the flesh, or made pure according to the flesh. It obviously, this is rhetorical, right? We know that this is clearly a rhetorical answer. The answer is no. We know for a fact that you can't be purified by the flesh, and this is clearly designed to be a rhetorical question that he knows the answer to. You cannot be perfected by the flesh. That's the emphasis of Galatians chapter 3. And I cite these to show you how paradoxical, the purification of the flesh even is as a statement. This statement should not exist. This is very old Jewish Mosaic covenant thinking, wherein Levites said, well, you're technically clean, so you can enter the assembly. And this is something to bear in mind too. Being pure according to the flesh in the Mosaic law, you could be a horrible sinner. You could be a miserable, selfish, greedy person to your core and live that way and speak that way and not murder anybody, and not commit adultery, and technically be clean on paper in front of the Levites, and you got to go into the assembly. Right? So the purification of the flesh, in many cases, has nothing to do with sin, and has nothing to do with inner morality whatsoever, because there were very clean, quote-unquote, people in the Old Testament who technically entered into the assembly of God and were clean on paper and were horrible people and were miserable sinners. And they exercised every method of sin. But if they sacrificed enough, and no matter what they said, and they did the correct sacrifices, and they did all the correct rituals for cleanliness, then yep, they can come in. They can enter the tabernacle. My point being that this is a very low-level purification. This is a useless purification. This is a pointless and amoral purification. Okay? To be clean in the Mosaic law speaks nothing to sin, speaks nothing to the general state of your heart. It in no way makes you good before God. It in no way makes you holy. It in no way grants you access to God via a perfect conscience. This is designed to be a paradoxical statement, to make holy according to the flesh. That in and of itself is impossible, right? And the author knows that. And the author's writing that to demonstrate the fact that the flesh can't be purified, and what actions Levitical priests think they can make to make you pure by doing X, Y, and Z are going to yield nothing, right? It's moralless. It is spiritually dead. And all it does is say, yep, legally and technically speaking, I can enter the tabernacle now. I'm allowed to come inside. That's all it says, even if you're a miserable person. I mean, the Pharisees are case in point, right? You used to have a great number of people who were very clean, right, on paper, and are, Christ says sons of hell. And these are the people that he is talking about in Hebrews chapter 9. You can technically do all this stuff here. You can spread goat blood and bull's blood and sprinkle the ashes of heifers around, and you can be clean on paper. That is correct. So then it sets up verse 14. So how much more do you think the blood of Christ is going to accomplish? It's going to be even greater. Now, what I've apparently done is used up all my time on one verse against my own warning, and I'm going to go ahead and table it for tonight because I do not want to start verse 14 by itself. But this begins the next stage of the logical argument. If you can technically be clean on paper with all this stuff, then how much more powerful do you think the blood of Christ is? I'm going to go ahead and cut the stream there. I apologize. I didn't get as far as I planned to, but I will do verse 14 next week, and we will finish up this